Hey everyone, so today we are going to play an offense from the day one. So imagine just flipping the script in employment lawsuit so the employer just scrambles to settle almost just as soon as the case begins. And this is not just about a polite by the numbers litigation, it's about a powerful strategic just moves that shake the employer's confidence early. And as a plaintiff, you can't just afford to draw out a war of attrition, and you need to tilt the leverage just decisively in your favor and do it fast. And in this monologue, we will explore just the rare but effective tactics to destroy an employer's credibility and just force a massive settlement before a case ever sees a jury. From a stealthy discovery just traps to a deposition maneuvers that make defendants sweat. And we are diving into advanced strategies just backed by real cases and that go beyond the banal just be persistent advice. So let's start. The tone here is not just unapologetically just aggressive, because if you're a plaintiff in an employment dispute, you want just results, not platitudes. And we will cover how to exploit every inconsistency, every delay, every overconfident defense tricks to corner the opposition. And by the end, you will see how an employer's just side litigator can turn the tables and make the employer eager to pay up early. So let's get into the specifics. Tactic 1, the shock and wave complaint. Your first opportunity to rattle the employer is at the very outset the complaint. So don't file a bland, just generic complaint that leads like a form. And instead, just consider a detailed, evidence-packed narrative that puts the employer on the defensive from the day one. And if your case just has a smoking gun evidence, emails, texts, recorded comments, or strong witness statements, just leverage them in a pleading by quoting damning emails or describing incidents vividly. So while just still keeping on to the facts, you send a message that we have the receipts. And this isn't just for a drama. It's a strategic, well-crafted, just particularized complaint, and that can make the defense counsel just to realize that their usual denials and invasions just won't fly, and it starts to undermine the employer's narrative immediately. First of all, you should frame the story. So you should craft a compelling story of the employer's just wrongdoing with specific dates, quotes, and contradictions. And if the employers gave one reason for firing in an email but now claims another, just include that discrepancy in the complaint. And a changing reason for a termination are a classic sign of a pretext. And the court have noted that when the employer's story just keeps changing, it suggests a retaliation or a discrimination. And by highlighting just such shifts upfront, you erode their credibility from the very start. And there can be, of course, a public exposure, which they hate. As a detailed complaint, which is a public document, also serves as a warning that embarrassing details could emerge, and employers hate bad PR. And if appropriate, you might even attack in just the key documents as exhibits. And the goal is to make the company just realize that fighting will air their dirty laundry. And in high-profile cases, the plaintiffs sometimes engage the press or amplify the effect just ethically and carefully. And as one attorney advises that publicizing a case can demand a public accountability for justice and forcing an employer to confront the court of a public opinion. So always stay within ethical bounds. So avoid just commenting on inadmissible evidence or violating any gag orders. And a shock and wave just complaint is not about just ball. So it's about just showing you're armed with evidence and not just afraid to see it. And it sets the tone. And the plaintiff is on the offense and the employer's credibility is just already under attack. So it was the first tactic. The second tactic is that employed just every documentation gap and all the inconsistencies that exist. As employers love to claim they had legitimate reasons for their actions, but those reasons often hinge on the documentation and performance reviews and the warning memos and the policy papers. And if there are gaps or flaws in that paper trail, so you can drive a truck through them and just level the company's defense. And in fact, a poor or inconsistent documentation can be a gold mine for a plaintiff's counsel. You should also consider that the case of a 59-year-old employer just fired after decades of a service, and so the company said it's terminated him for a performance and backed by a couple of bad reviews and a performance improvement plan (PIP). But under scrutiny, the documentation fell apart, and just a few years before firing him, the employer just had been rated as a meets expectations and even just won a District Manager of the Year award. So flatly contradicting the claim that he would perform poorly for years, and even just worse, the PIP document claimed that the boss had counseled him 3 times about the issues, including 2 meetings that hadn't just even happened yet. And the dates on the PIP predated and the supposed counseling sessions. So these inconsistencies and the timeline errors just were glaring, and the court's reaction? So it found the employer's explanation dubious. Loose documentation discredits the company's official story, and the jury could easily just conclude that the real reason was unlawful discrimination. The lesson is very clear, so hunt for inconsistencies. Just incoherencies and just contradictions in employment just records, and I can just provide you some things, directions that you can weaponize, and upon them, first of all, you should compare everything. So line up performance reviews, emails, internal reports, termination letters, and see if the narrative just shifts and the firing letter just cites violations of policy, but emails just show praise or no prior write-ups, just spotlight that. And as one legal insight notes that an employee who can show that the employer's reasons just don't add up or have changed over time has a much easier path to a trial and a victory. You can demand drafts and the metadata as a rare but potential discovery, and that move is asking for draft versions of key documents. Can be very powerful, as employers just often polish and the final polished apps just on the record to look legit. But early drafts might reveal a just different story or impermissible motives. And just for example, so an initial draft of a performance review just might mention your client's protected characteristics or complaints, attendance issues just while on medical leave, or a manager's jest remark, and that mysteriously disappear in the final version. And if you only get the final PDFs, you're missing context. And so request all versions and the metadata, creation dates, authors, and one plaintiff side litigator just recount that if you don't ask for a drafts, you won't get them, and those drafts may reflect employer's intent and the motive, and far just more candidly than the sanitized final copy. And catching a discrepancy between the draft and the final is like catching the companies in a lie, and devastating for their credibility. You can also spot timeline traps as a create detailed timeline of events using both your client story and the employer's just documents. So often you will spot impossible or lapses, and the example above a PIP documenting future just counseling sessions was a smoking gun, and if an employee claims that they fired the employee for an incident on March 1st, but an initial memo showed that they were considering termination in February. So you're just uncovered a pretext, highlighted in discovery responses and eventually to a judge. These timeline gaps suggest that the reason is pretextual and not the true reason. By meticulously exploiting documentation flaws, you corner the employer into just unwinnable position, and they can either admit the inconsistencies just hurting their case, or come up with new explanations which only dig them deeper. And this pressure often just nudges defendants toward an early settlement rather than just having the credibility shredded on the records. And in tactic number 3, just summarizing the previous two, is just adding up additional discovery traps to expose the truth, as discovery is where you can really make this case square and defense, so they know it. If you approach it as a strategic battleground, as many employers will try to play hide and seek with evidence, and your job is to anticipate that and lay traps that turn their tricks against them. So here are some advanced moves to dominate discovery and crack the employer's just confidence. First of all, document camouflage, counter it. A common defense tactic is to dump a disorganized mass of papers, just hoping you miss their gems, or to provide only partial records, like an email thread, just missing the damning reply. And don't just let them get away with it, and just combine just through every production for holes. And for example, if you see an HR email from your client's boss to one of your managers, so how they handle your client, and the next email is a sequence or is unrelated or missing red flag, and show up just immediately. So ask explicitly for the rest of that thread. And if the defense lawyers just deflects, that's all just clients gave me, don't buy it. Spring the trap by serving a fresh request. Something like produce all prior or subsequent communications related to the incident. This puts them in a bind. Either they will find and hand over the missing piece or their admitted gun. And if they still stonewall, you've set up a potential motion to compel, and that will make them look like they're hiding evidence. And as one seasoned litigator advises that you may ever just you may even need to get the courts involved and demand the data in a native format that with metadata to prove what's missing. And the mere fact that aggressively just following up signals to the employer that you are not an easy opponent. You shouldn't settle for PDF printouts. So many times employer produce emails pasted into PDFs with crucial fields. Like timestamps or recipients, and mysteriously just cut off and insist on originals. If you get just weirdly formatted documents, request the original native files. This not only helps you to get all info, it also just tells the defense that you are suspect trickery, and psychologically just putting them on the notice that a sloppy or a sneaky production just won't fly. There can be a drafts and a missing documents, as I mentioned earlier. So always request drafts or critical documents, reviews, PIPs, termination letters. And if the employer just refuses the claims not exist, and later you discover one, say from a sympathetic witness or a metadata, so you have caught them in a lie in a court, a sanctionable offense. And the threat of that one just alone can drive the settlement talks. Also, ask for a metadata just logs or a revision histories, and it's an uncommon ask that can unveil if for instance, termination memo was edited after the fact to add the new reasons. We've seen cases where an initial termination letter cited one minor infraction, but a later revised version included a laundry list of reasons to justify the firing. And if you can show the explanation and that was expanded with a many expansion of the reasons, so you can use it to your advantage. It's a leverage. Also, you can leverage spoliation and destruction of evidence. And sometimes the trap isn't just one you set, but one that employers falls into just on their own, like failing into just preserve a key evidence. Be on a high alert for any hint of spoliation, as if a crucial emails mysteriously just vanished or a video footage was deleted, you have a powerful weapon. Just courts can issue sanctions that cripple an employer's defense. And in one case, Walmart recognized over just surveillance footage, and that could have shown why an employer was fired. And the court responded just by declaring that the destruction created a presumption that the employer stated reason was a lie, pretext, and that retaliation was the real cause. You should imagine that the impact of that, so let's say the jury can be instructed to assume that the employer was retaliating, and no company wants to face a jury under those conditions to settlement, and so settlements become far more likely. So another case involved a company just failing to preserve a data on production downloads, and in a discrimination case, and the judge barred them from even arguing their key evidence because they would lose the records and sanctions that left them nearly defenseless. And in extreme example of spoliation in trade secret suits, the defendants just related so much evidence that the court issued a terminating sanctions, essentially just handling a win to a plaintiff by default. And these are a big headline sanctions, but even just the lesser ones like jury instructions or attorney fees just massively tilt leverage to the plaintiff. And if you sniff just out spoliation, move to a sanctions without hesitation, the very threat of an adverse interference or evidence preclusion order can prompt an early settlement discussion. And the employer know that their credibility with the court is a shot if you prevail on that motion, of course. And in short, so treat discovery not as a short, but as a strategic game of chess. And every incomplete answer, every delayed response, every objection can be an opportunity to pounce. And by settling just for and springing these discovery traps, you make the employer's attorneys nervous and their case untenable, and setting the stage for them to offer a big settlement rather than just continue a losing battle. Another tactic number 4, deposition guerrilla warfare. So depositions are often the make or break moments in a litigation, and this is where you can corner witnesses, expose lies, and create that gotcha moment, which later forces the defense to its knees. To destroy the employer's credibility, you need to approach depositions with a tactical mindset. It's guerrilla warfare and not a polite just Q&A. So here is how to turn depositions into a nightmare for the defense and a gold mine for you. When you plan a deposition, just order this strategically. As a traditional wisdom just might say, depose the lower level folks first and work upward. But in some cases, a rare strategy just is to go straight for a jugular, the high-ranking officials. And if you can justify it, not every case allows an apex deposition, deposing a CEO or a top executive. Since courts often protect the execs who supposedly just have no direct knowledge. However, if your case and jurisdiction permit, noticing a deposition of a C-suite executive just early can send shockwaves throughout the company. And even if the deposition gets delayed or limited, the message is sent. So we are not playing small. And often the very goal of an apex deposition is not to gather facts, but to exert pressure for a better settlement. Companies will fight tooth and nail to shield their top brass from sitting in a deposition hot seat because they know it's risky and distracting. And the effort and the concern that the defense shows in them resisting can be leveraged in negotiations. We will postpone the CEO's depot for the right price, and it's a high-stakes tactic, and you must have a colorable basics to seek that deposition. But the mere threat can enhance your leverage. Exploiting invasive witnesses is also another thing. So nothing destroys a witness credibility, and by extension, the employer's case, like obvious evasion or absurd answers under oath. A stunning example comes from a race discrimination case against a brewery in Michigan. In a deposition, the plaintiff's attorney simply asked the supervisor if he knew the plaintiff, who was black, was a black man, and the supervisor likely coached with the generic advice, don't speculate, just took it to ridiculous extremes. He claimed he wasn't sure of the plaintiff's lineage and couldn't just answer whether the man was African American, and he kept just dodging basic questions and just about the skin color to the point of farce, and even deflecting on whether famous black figures like Barack Obama or Michael Jordan and black. Just this absurd evasiveness made him and the company look unbelievable and possibly just biased when the portions of that deposition went public. And the PR firestorm ensued, and the brewery just suffered serious reputational damage. And within a day, the case settled. And the plaintiff's lawyer in that deposition masterfully just cornered the witness with the simple, direct questions that any normal person would answer plainly. And by refusing to do so, the supervisor just destroyed his credibility and the takeaway. And if you sense a witness is just overcoaching or hiding something, just zero on that point with the clear, simple questions. Don't be afraid of repetition or repressing obvious facts. Those can yield the most damning answers or no answers. So lock them into an absurd position if they resist. And if it will only help you later, and whether just in front of a judge, jury, or even the media. You can use also a 13b6 deposition as a weapon in a corporate case. As a rule, 13b6 deposition where the companies must designate an official, a spokesperson, to testify on its behalf. And it's a chance to bind the company to a story and just use it early, if possible, to define the topics that force the company to take a position or key issues. So the reason for a plaintiff's terminations or the investigation of plaintiff's complaint. And if they designate just gives ill-prepared or inconsistent answers, that becomes the company's official testimony, and any contradiction later can be used to impeach them. And the companies know the risk. A 30b6 witness could inadvertently admit something or say, I don't know, or just one too many times, and undercutting their defense. And that's a risk and the fuel that can settlement talks initially. So especially if you catch them unprepared. Another pro tip is that if the defense tries to offer written answers or a lower level people instead of someone just truly in the known push back. You want someone who should know the answer on the record, or an admission that the company can't just answer, just either outcome can be potent. And a psychological edge is obvious, as protecting your client and just using their tactics against them. As a defense lawyer sometimes attempt to bully or just wear down the plaintiffs in a deposition, just taking unreasonably just long depositions and asking harassing or repetitive questions and hoping the plaintiff will crack. And be ready to turn that against them. So first you shield your client, and if you have a vulnerable plaintiff, just someone emotionally traumatized, seek limitations and like shorter sessions or breaks up front. And if the defense crosses the line with argumentative or repetitive questioning, don't hesitate to object and even suspect the deposition to get a protective order. This is not just about protection, it's a strategy. And defense attorneys who comes off as a bully can lose credibility with a judge or a jury if the video is shown later. So document any abusive behavior. If it's egregious, you can later move for sanctions, which can again put the pressure on the employer. So remember, professionalism matters. One in court and admonished. Just a defense lawyer whose deposition conduct and insulting the plaintiff's lawyer competence was deemed unprofessional intimidation. So that kind of ruling bolsters your side. So by all means, do not let defense counsel turn deposition into a one-sided ordeal. Fight back with the rules. It shows that the other side that you're in control, and it builds a record of
it's
their.
It's time for bed. Sleep tight.
Okay, and it built a record of their misconduct if needed. You can also videotape a key depositions as a picture or a video is a worth of 1,000 words. So if a witness, say a manager or a HR rep, is likely to come off just a poorly evasive, arrogant, or overly nervous, consider the videotaping the depo and the prospect that their demeanor just could be played for a jury. That can motivate a settlement. And for instance, an HR manager rolling her eyes or a supervisor just raising the voice at you on the camera will make for a powerful just exhibit A in a mediation brief. And the employer's team know this. And so the very act of settling up a camera may keep the witness just more measured or yield just a great footage. Either way, you win. And in deposition, guerrilla warfare, you are setting just ambushes and asking the unexpected questions, just pinning down the witnesses on the specifics and catching any slip up. And a single disastrous answer can unravel the defense case. And importantly, that the depositions also give you a leverage in a settlement. You can frankly tell opposing counsel, your VP did it terribly in a depo. I can't just wait to show this jury. And that often prompts that, what do you want to resolve it? Phone call sooner just rather than later. Another tactic 5 is psychological warfare and public leverage. So legal maneuvers aside, litigation is a mind game. And if you get in the heads of the employer or their counsel, you gain an intangible but real advantage. So the ideal is to project confidence, relentless, and a willingness to play hardball, just making the stress and the risk for the employer as high as possible. So this often pushes them to seek an exit, just a settlement early. And let's talk psychological and PR risks. You should show no fear and mean it. A defense lawyer often just wield the threat of sanctions or expensive motions that clump, hoping you will back off just aggressive tactics. Maybe they warn you that if you don't narrow discovery, they will ask the judge to make you pay a fees, etc. And for a newer attorney, so these threats can be scary. But as one experienced litigator put it, the threat of a hefty discovery sanctions should not dissuade you from pursuing proper discovery. And if there is no risk, there is no reward. And in reality, sanctions threats are often just a bluff. And if you are on a solid legal ground, just push forward. File your motions to compel or to protective orders confidently. And by doing so, you sleep the script. Instead of just fearing their motions, they have to worry about yours, and this also just builds your reputation and the defense, and they are just broader in industry and network. So we'll learn that you are not just easily intimidated, and an employer just facing a plaintiff's lawyer with a fired just reputation may think twice about prolonging a fight, and they know it will just cost them more and possibly embarrass them more in the court. If you leverage timing and deadlines, it will be a dead end for them. So use the clock to your advantage. And for instance, if your case if you sense that the employers is dragging their feet, a common defense tactic, that delay game, don't grant endless extensions. Be cautious but firm. Maybe one extension for a discovery response, then make it clear just you will involve the court. And by scheduling in depositions, hearings, or in just early trial date, if you have some control over that as soon as possible, so you increase the pressure. And the closer a major just milestone like a summary judgment hearing or a trial gets, the more the defense has to evaluate their chances. And if you are just undermine their case, in the ways we've discussed, they won't be feeling confident, and those dates loom, which leads to a better settlement prospects. Public relationships, PR pressure, also another thing. So we touched on this with the complaint and media. It's worth emphasizing that in the right case, media can be a powerful ally, as companies, especially consumer-facing ones, value their reputation, as a well-trimmed press release or an interview can shine a spotlight on their employer's just alleged misconduct, and thereby just raising the stakes. And for example, so after that disastrous deposition in the brewery case, the plaintiff took the initiative to share experts with the media, just triggering a public outcry. And the brewery image took a hit, and they even closed a tap room amid the backlash, and that undoubtedly just helped drive the quick settlement. Now, as a lawyer, you might navigate ethical rules carefully. So, Model Rule 3.6 on a public trial, so as noted by attorney Tolly Jaramilya, and you can generally share public record, just information, and speak on matters of a public concern, but avoid anything that could prejudice a proceeding. And the do's and don'ts of a litigation PR are beyond our just scope here. But know this: if your client consents and it's done right, so going to public can put a massive pressure on an employer, and they risk a brand damage and employers' morale issues, even stock price dips in some cases, all because of a lawsuit that, from their perspective, could be quietly settled. So the media is a sword to unshed just selectively, but when you do, it can put a deep into the just employer's willingness to fight. Better to expose hypocrisy, as many employers, especially larger ones, care just about their core values or a public image of being just fair and inclusive. And if you can publicize in the court filings or media that their treatment of you violated of your client violated their own policies or statements that embarrass them. And for instance, if a company just code of a conduct says, we have zero tolerance for harassment, but you have evidence that ignored your client's complaints for a month, so make that contrast clear. And this isn't just a moral high ground, just posturing. It can influence a mediator or judge to just who recognize a jury would likely dislike such hypocrisy, and it all contributes to credibility destruction. You should use early hearings to undermine credibility too. It's in addition to the previous one, as if you have a preliminary injunction hearing or even a discovery dispute hearing, you can sometimes score points, as the judges just notice that when a party's story doesn't just end up, or when one side is heavily unreasonable, and for example, if in a discovery motion you point out that the employer claimed certain documents don't exist, but you found some, and that paints the defense as either incompetent or dishonest, not a good look in the front of a court. And a judge's sharp comments about the employer's conduct, even a minor hearing, just will be relayed to the corporate decision makers. And no employer wants a judge just thinking they're shady before the main event. That again drives them to seek settlement to avoid a further reputational damage in the court. In psychological warfare, the key is maintaining the upper hand in the perception. So you want the defense to perceive that you have more ammunition, you have total resolve, and their position is only just going to worsen. So when they look at you and see a relentless force, someone ready to bring up every flaw in their case and broadcast it if needed, the rational choice becomes end the pain early. And often that means a substantial settlement to compensate your clients and just make the case go away. There are many real-world examples, just early settlement tactic in action. To cement these concepts, let's briefly recap a few real or illustrative examples where aggressive tactics led to early settlement or wins. First of all, the case called the brewery deposition fiasco. A supervisor's incredible deposition testimony claiming he couldn't just identify a long-time black employee race because of the public just sparkling outrage. So the company's credibility was annihilated in the eyes of the public and likely the future jury pool. And the result was that the employer settled within a days to stop the bleeding. And in takeaway, so skillful questioning plus media can corner the employer into settling by harming their public credibility. The flawed documentation case is another example that where the 59 years old manager's age discrimination suit advanced because the employer's paperwork was internally inconsistent, praising him, then firing for a poor performance, and eventually just factually impossible, just future counseling sessions noted in the PIP. So the court denied summary judgment, meaning a public trial on a discrimination was looming, and facing the likelihood of a sympathetic jury and having been caught in apparent lies. So the employer's best move is often to settle high rather than just risk a trial loss and more bad precedent. So takeaway and catching contradictions in the company story just early forces them to evaluate the true risk of going just forward. So Walmart's vanishing video in the retaliation case, a supervisor just claiming video footage proved misconduct, but the footage was not presented and got recorded over, and the court sanctioned the employer by presuming the worst, that the lost evidence would have just favored the plaintiff, and the stated firing reason was a pretext. So this essentially kneecapped the employer's defense with such a sanction on the record, and the companies would be under immense pressure to settle rather than let a jury hear that they destroyed evidence in a thick way. So piercing sanctions for evidence spoliation can give you a near just decisive leverage early on. And the spoliation Armageddon just rewrite case. In non-employment cases, trade secrets, a startup, so flagrantly violated evidence preservation and deleting emails, just wiping laptops, that the judge issued termination and terminating sanctions, entering the default against them. It's a worst possible scenario that can someone imagine. So this illustrates the nuclear option outcome, and in employment cases, while rare, if you ever hit upon proof of intentional evidence destruction, you might achieve a similar result, or at least an adverse interference. Knowing that possibly many employers have chosen to settle quietly and confidentially rather than just risk a very public courtroom sanction. So takeaway, even the prospect of severe sanctions given a huge bargaining power can intimidate them. The apex deposition threat. So think of a scenario where a plaintiff in a harassment case noticed the deposition of a Fortune 500 CEO just early claiming the need to explore a company's culture and just top-down accountability. So the defense moved for a protective order under the apex doctrine. And before the court even decided, that bold move may drive the company to increase their settlement offer, because the last thing that the CEO wants is to be deposed, or worse, to be seen as a hiding from a deposition. And just imagine the headlines. So there may be not a public record to cite here, just since these maneuvers often just lead to a settlement before a judge rules. But it's a play just used by savvy litigators. And takeaway, so creative pressure tactics, even if not ultimately successful in a court, can pay off in the negotiations. Each of these examples reinforces out just a core theme that undermines the employer's credibility and comfort early, just in the cases leads to a better outcomes for plaintiffs. Whether it's just through exposing lies, leveraging bad behavior, or creating external pressure, these tactics just shift the power dynamic. And there can be a very just reasonable conclusion that leverage secured time to settle on your terms. As aggressive plaintiff side litigation is not just about being reckless, it's about being relentless, strategic by employing these tactics we've discussed, from seizing the narrative with detailed complaint to scoring for documentation missteps, to laying just discovery traps and waging psychological warfare. So you methodically chip away at the employer's facade of confidence and credibility. And what's left is a defendant who has to face the facts, and they are better off settling, and sooner rather than later. You should keep in mind that these moves must be executed ethically and intelligently, and the goal is to pursue sanctions or media exposure for their own sake, but to zealously advance your client's position when done right. The mere threat of what you could do often is enough to bring the other side to the table with a serious offer, and you're affecting saying, I know your weak spots, and I will exploit every one of them. And that's a powerful message, and employers who receive it just loud and clear will prefer a hefty but a controlled settlement over a scorched litigation loss. And finally, so remember that credibility is a king in litigation. If you have unblemished record, if you are just a reasonable person, and you can advocate for yourself by being prepared, factual, and unafraid, while simultaneously eviscerating the employer's credibility by exposing inconsistencies and bad behavior, and the scales of justice tip in your favor. And at that point, a massive settlement is not a dream. It's a logical conclusion. So go forth and litigate, and not just for a passion, but with a plan. So use these cutting-edge tactics to make your case unforgettable, one that employer will want to resolve early on your client's terms. And that's how you win big, and that's how you deliver justice in employment litigation. So now go out there and shake their confidence. The settlement victory will follow, I promise.